The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the rocky terrain of Afghanistan's Helmand province as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos checked her instruments one final time. Her A-10 Thunderbolt II, call sign Warthog 6, sat ready on the tarmac at Forward Operating Base Chapman, its twin engines humming with contained power. The aircraft's distinctive design, built around the massive 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon, made it look more like a flying tank than a conventional fighter jet. Maria had been flying combat missions for 3 years, but today felt different. Intelligence reports indicated that a Navy SEAL team, call sign Trident 4, had been conducting a high-value target capture mission in the mountains near the Pakistan border when they walked into a carefully planned ambush. The team of 12 elite operators was now pinned down in a valley surrounded by Taliban fighters who had been preparing for this moment for weeks. The morning briefing had painted a grim picture. Commander Jake Reaper Morrison, the SEAL team leader, was a legend among Special Operations Forces. His team had successfully completed over 50 missions without losing a single man. But this time they were outnumbered 20-1, trapped in terrain that favored the enemy, with limited ammunition and no clear extraction route. "Santos, your wheel's up in 5, came the voice of Colonel Richardson through her headset. "Trident 4 is in serious trouble. They've been under heavy fire for 6 hours, and close air support is their only hope." Maria's hands moved with practiced precision across the controls as she ran through her pre-flight checklist. The A-10 was loaded with a full complement of weapons. 174 rounds of 30mm ammunition for the cannon, AGM-65 Maverick missiles, and 500-pound bombs. But she knew that in close air support missions like this, precision was more important than firepower. As she taxied toward the runway, Maria thought about her journey to this moment. Growing up in East Los Angeles, she had never imagined herself as a military pilot. Her father worked double shifts at a factory while her mother cleaned offices at night to make ends meet. When military recruiters visited her high school, Maria saw an opportunity not just to serve her country, but to break the cycle of poverty that had defined her family for generations. The path hadn't been easy. Flight school was brutal, with instructors who seemed determined to wash out anyone who showed the slightest weakness. Maria faced additional challenges as one of the few women in her class, dealing with skeptical peers and instructors who questioned whether she had the physical and mental toughness required for combat aviation. But Maria had something that couldn't be taught in any classroom: an unwavering determination to prove herself worthy of the trust placed in her by ground forces who would depend on her skills for their survival. She graduated 3rd in her class and specifically requested assignment to A-10 squadrons, knowing that the aircraft was primarily used for close air support missions where precision and courage mattered more than speed and flash. "Warthog 6, you are cleared for takeoff," crackled through her radio as Maria aligned her aircraft with the runway. The twin General Electric TF-34 engines roared to life, pushing the heavily armored aircraft down the runway with surprising acceleration. Within seconds, she was airborne, climbing steadily toward her assigned altitude of 15,000 feet. The flight to the target area would take 23 minutes, giving Maria time to review the tactical situation and coordinate with the Joint Terminal Attack Controller attached to the SEAL team. The radio chatter painted an increasingly desperate picture. The SEALs were running low on ammunition, had taken casualties, and were facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. "Warthog 6, this is Trident 4 actual," came a calm but strained voice through the radio. It was Commander Morrison himself, calling from a position that intelligence estimated was surrounded by over 200 Taliban fighters. "We are in urgent need of close air support. Enemy forces have us pinned down from multiple directions, and we have wounded that need immediate evacuation." Maria's training kicked in as she began her approach to the target area. The terrain below was a maze of rocky ridges, steep valleys, and cave complexes that had provided shelter for fighters in this region for centuries. Finding friendly forces and distinguishing them from enemies in this environment would require every skill she had developed over hundreds of hours of training and combat missions. Trident 4. Actual, this is Warthog 6, Maria responded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. I am 2 minutes out from your position. Can you mark your location with smoke? Negative, Warthog 6. Enemy is too close. Any marking would give away our exact position. We are in a rocky outcropping approximately 500 meters north of a dried riverbed. Enemy positions are on the ridges to our east, west, and south. Maria studied her instruments and the terrain below through her targeting pod. The area was exactly as described in the intelligence briefing. A natural killing field where the enemy could fire down on anyone trapped in the valley floor while remaining protected behind rocks and in cave entrances. It was a tactical nightmare that required surgical precision to provide effective support without risking friendly fire. As she circled the area at 12,000 feet, Maria could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions along the ridgelines. The enemy had clearly planned this ambush carefully, positioning fighters to create overlapping fields of fire that would make movement impossible for the trapped SEALs. Standard procedures would normally require her to climb to a higher altitude and use guided missiles to engage enemy positions, but the close proximity of friendly and enemy forces made such tactics extremely risky. Warthog 6, we've got movement on the eastern ridge, came another voice from the SEAL team. Estimate 30 to 40 fighters moving to flank our position. If they get in behind us, we're finished. Maria made a decision that went against standard operating procedures, but reflected the reality of the situation on the ground. Instead of staying at altitude, she began a controlled descent toward 8,000 feet, bringing her aircraft within range of enemy small arms fire, but giving her the visual contact necessary to distinguish between friendly and enemy positions. Through her targeting pod, she could now see individual fighters moving among the rocks. The enemy was closer to the SEAL position than anyone had realized. In some cases, the distance between friendly and enemy positions was less than 50 meters, making traditional close air support nearly impossible without risking catastrophic friendly fire incidents. Trident 4, this is Warthog 6. I have visual on enemy movement. You need to get your heads down now. I'm coming in hot. Maria rolled her aircraft into a steep dive, lining up for a gun run that would take her directly over the eastern ridge where the enemy flanking movement was most advanced. The A-10's cannon was designed for precisely this type of mission, surgical strikes against ground targets with minimal collateral damage. Each round was depleted uranium, capable of penetrating armor and concrete while maintaining accuracy even in difficult conditions. The enemy fighters on the ridge had noticed her approach and were now directing small arms fire skyward. Maria could see tracer rounds streaking past her cockpit as she maintained her dive angle, waiting for the perfect moment to engage. At 1,500 feet above ground level, she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 cannon erupted with its distinctive buzzsaw sound, firing 70 rounds per second directly into the enemy positions. The depleted uranium rounds tore through rock and flesh with equal efficiency, silencing the flanking movement in a matter of seconds. Maria pulled out of her dive and began climbing for another pass, already identifying her next target. "Outstanding, Warthog 6!" came Commander Morrison's voice, filled with relief and admiration. "You just saved our bacon. Enemy movement on the eastern ridge has been neutralized." But Maria knew the battle was far from over. The enemy had prepared for air support and had positioned fighters in multiple locations specifically to counter such attacks. As she climbed back to attack altitude, she could see muzzle flashes from new positions, indicating that the Taliban was adapting to her presence and repositioning for continued assault on the SEAL team. The battle had been raging for 7 hours when Maria realized that conventional tactics weren't going to save the SEAL team. Despite her successful gun runs on the eastern ridge, enemy fighters continued to emerge from cave positions and hidden bunkers that intelligence had failed to identify. The Taliban had clearly been planning this ambush for weeks, possibly months, creating a network of fighting positions that could sustain heavy casualties while maintaining effective fire on the trapped Americans. "Warthog 6, we're taking heavy casualties down here," came a new voice through the radio. It was Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, the team's medic. "2 KIA, 4 wounded. We need immediate evacuation, but there's no way a helicopter can get in here with this much enemy fire." Maria's fuel gauge showed she had been on station for 45 minutes, longer than standard protocol allowed. She should have been relieved by another aircraft 30 minutes ago, but mechanical problems had grounded the backup A-10, and no other close air support assets were available. The nearest Apache helicopters were committed to another operation 60 miles away, and fast movers like F-16s lacked the loiter time and precision weapons necessary for this type of mission. From her position at 10,000 feet, Maria could see the tactical situation deteriorating by the minute. The enemy had managed to move additional fighters into positions that allowed them to fire down into the SEAL team's defensive perimeter from 3 sides. Worse, intelligence was now reporting that reinforcements were moving toward the area from multiple directions, potentially increasing the enemy force to over 400 fighters. "Trident 4 actual, this is Warthog 6, Maria called to Commander Morrison. "I need you to be completely honest with me about your situation. Can you hold your position until backup arrives?" There was a long pause before Morrison's voice came back through the radio, and Maria could hear the weight of command in every word. "Warthog 6, my honest assessment is that we have maybe 30 minutes before they overrun our position. My boys have been magnificent, but we're almost out of ammunition and we can't treat our wounded properly under this kind of fire." Maria made a decision that would either save 12 lives or cost them all, including her own. She began descending again, this time not just to 8,000 feet, but continuing down to 3,000 feet above ground level. At that altitude, she would be within effective range of every enemy weapon in the valley, including rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns that could easily bring down her aircraft. "What are you doing, Warthog 6? Came Morrison's urgent voice as he watched the A-10 descending far below safe operating altitude. "I'm going to give you boys some breathing room," Maria replied, her voice calm despite the fact that she was essentially flying into a kill zone. "I need you to mark your position with whatever you can. Throw a smoke grenade, use a mirror, anything so I can see exactly where you are." "Negative, Warthog 6. That altitude is suicide. Pull up and wait for backup." But Maria had already committed to her course of action. At 3,000 feet, she could see individual enemy fighters with perfect clarity. More importantly, she could distinguish between the muzzle flashes coming from positions where the enemy was firing at her aircraft and those where they were firing down at the SEAL team. The precision this visual contact provided would allow her to engage targets within 50 meters of friendly positions without risk of friendly fire. The enemy response was immediate and intense. Tracer rounds filled the air around her aircraft like deadly fireflies, and she could hear the distinctive crack of bullets passing close to her cockpit. An RPG streaked past her left wing, close enough that she could see the individual fins on the warhead. But Maria held her course, lining up for a gun run that would take her directly over the western ridge, where the heaviest enemy fire was originating. At 2,000 feet above ground level, she squeezed the trigger again. The cannon's depleted uranium rounds tore into the rocky positions with devastating effect, silencing machine gun nests and sending enemy fighters scrambling for deeper cover. But Maria wasn't finished. Instead of climbing back to altitude, she maintained her low-level flight path, using the terrain to mask her approach for another gun run on the southern ridge. "Jesus Christ! Warthog 6, came Rodriguez's voice, filled with awe. "You're flying through a wall of lead down here. How are you still airborne?" The answer was a combination of the A-10's legendary survivability and Maria's skill as a pilot. The aircraft had been specifically designed to absorb battle damage and continue flying. Its engines were mounted high on the fuselage to reduce vulnerability to ground fire. The cockpit was surrounded by a titanium bathtub that could stop most small arms rounds, and redundant flight control systems ensured that the aircraft could continue flying even with significant damage. But no aircraft was invulnerable, and Maria knew she was pushing her luck with every pass. During her third gun run, she felt the aircraft shudder as several rounds found their mark. Warning lights illuminated on her instrument panel, indicating damage to hydraulic systems and possibly the left engine. But the aircraft continued to respond to her controls, and she had ammunition remaining. "Warthog 6, enemy movement to the north," Morrison called out. "Looks like they're trying to cut off our escape route to the landing zone." Maria banked hard to the left, bringing her aircraft around for an attack on the northern positions. This would be her most dangerous pass yet, as it would take her directly over the valley where the enemy had concentrated their heaviest weapons. But she could see the tactical picture clearly now. The Taliban wasn't just trying to destroy the SEAL team in place. They were systematically cutting off all escape routes while bringing in reinforcements for a final assault. As she lined up for the attack, Maria noticed something that chilled her blood. Through her targeting pod, she could see enemy fighters moving heavy weapons into positions that would allow them to engage any helicopter attempting to evacuate the wounded SEALs. The enemy had clearly anticipated that the Americans would eventually attempt a medical evacuation and had prepared accordingly. "Trident 4, this is Warthog 6, Maria called as she began her attack run. "After I hit these northern positions, you need to be ready to move. I can see enemy heavy weapons moving into overwatch positions. If you don't move soon, they're going to make evacuation impossible." "Roger, Warthog 6, standing by to move on your call." Maria dove toward the northern ridge, her aircraft now showing multiple warning lights and handling with the sluggishness that indicated significant battle damage. She could feel vibrations through the control stick that suggested damage to the left engine, and her hydraulic pressure was dropping steadily. But she maintained her attack profile, determined to give the SEALs the opening they needed. The cannon fire from this pass was devastatingly accurate, destroying 2 heavy machine gun positions and scattering the crew of what appeared to be a recoilless rifle. But as she pulled out of the dive, Maria felt a tremendous impact on the left side of her aircraft. The left engine immediately began winding down, and multiple warning alarms filled her cockpit. "Warthog 6, you're trailing smoke," came Morrison's urgent voice. Maria checked her instruments and confirmed what she already suspected. She had taken serious damage and was now flying on essentially one engine. Standard procedure would be to immediately turn toward base and attempt an emergency landing. But a quick calculation told her that she probably didn't have enough fuel or engine power to make it back to Chapman, and even if she did, the SEAL team would be overrun long before she could return with backup. Instead, she made another decision that defied all training and common sense. She would remain on station and continue the attack until either the SEALs were safe or her aircraft could no longer fly. It was a choice that transformed a routine close air support mission into something approaching a suicide attack. But Maria had made her peace with the possible consequences the moment she decided to descend to attack altitude. "Trident 4, this is Warthog 6, she called as she struggled to maintain control of her damaged aircraft. "I'm still mission capable. Get ready to move toward the landing zone. I'm going to clear the path for you." Flying on one engine with multiple systems failing, Maria Santos faced the most critical decision of her military career. Her damaged A-10 was losing altitude steadily, and she had maybe 10 minutes of flight time remaining before the aircraft would no longer be controllable. The smart choice, the choice that every regulation and training manual would dictate, was to immediately head for base and attempt an emergency landing. But below her, 12 Navy SEALs were fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds, and she was their only hope for survival. Intelligence reports now indicated that enemy reinforcements were arriving from 3 different directions, bringing the total hostile force to over 500 fighters. Without continued air support, the SEAL team would be wiped out within the hour. "Warthog 6, you need to get out of here now." Commander Morrison's voice crackled through her radio. "We can hear your engine, and you're trailing heavy smoke. Don't get yourself killed trying to save us." "Negative, Trident 4, Maria replied, her voice steady despite the chaos in her cockpit. "I didn't come this far to leave you boys hanging. I've got enough firepower left to clear you a path to the landing zone." Through her targeting pod, Maria could see the enemy's final gambit unfolding. Taliban fighters were moving into positions that would allow them to ambush the SEAL team during any attempt to reach the evacuation point. Machine gun nests had been established on both sides of the only viable route to the landing zone, creating a deadly crossfire that would make movement impossible. Maria's fuel gauge showed she had enough fuel for maybe 3 more attack runs before her remaining engine would flame out. Her cannon ammunition counter indicated 400 rounds remaining, enough for perhaps 2 effective gun runs. Every decision from this point forward would have to be perfect, because there would be no second chances. "Trident 4, I need you to listen carefully," Maria called as she began maneuvering her crippled aircraft for another attack. "In exactly 2 minutes, I'm going to hit the machine gun positions overlooking your route to the LZ. When you see my cannon fire, you move fast and you don't stop until you reach the evacuation point. Understood?" "Roger. Warthog 6. We'll be ready." Maria lined up for what she knew would likely be her final gun run. Her aircraft was barely controllable now, requiring constant pressure on the right rudder to compensate for the asymmetric thrust from her single functioning engine. The control stick felt mushy in her hands, indicating damage to the flight control systems that was becoming more severe with each passing minute. At 2,500 feet above ground level, she began her attack dive. The enemy response was immediate and concentrated, with every available weapon in the valley firing at her aircraft. She could see muzzle flashes from positions she hadn't even known existed, indicating that the Taliban had prepared fighting positions throughout the entire valley complex. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded just off her right wing, close enough to shower her canopy with shrapnel, but not close enough to bring her down. She held her dive angle, waiting for the perfect moment to engage the machine gun positions that were preventing the SEALs from moving. At 1,000 feet above the targets, Maria squeezed the cannon trigger for what she knew might be the last time. The depleted uranium rounds tore into the enemy positions with devastating accuracy, silencing both machine gun nests and clearing the path for the SEAL team's movement. But as she pulled out of the dive, she felt another massive impact as enemy fire found her aircraft again. "Moving now!" came Morrison's voice as the SEAL team broke from their defensive positions and began moving toward the landing zone, carrying their wounded comrades and laying down suppressive fire as they moved. But Maria could see through her targeting pod that the enemy wasn't finished. Additional fighters were moving to intercept the SEALs before they could reach safety, and she still had one more crucial target to engage: a group of enemy fighters positioned near the landing zone who would be able to fire on any evacuation helicopter. Her aircraft was now critically damaged, with multiple warning lights illuminated and handling characteristics that suggested she was moments away from complete loss of control. But she had enough altitude and airspeed for one final attack, and she was determined to use it effectively. "Warthog 6. We can see enemy movement near the LZ, called Rodriguez, the team medic. Looks like they're setting up to engage the extraction bird." "I see them," Maria replied, already maneuvering for her final gun run. "Get your people to cover and keep your heads down." This attack would be different from all the others. With her aircraft no longer capable of sustained flight, Maria made the decision to use the aircraft itself as a weapon. Instead of pulling out of her dive after firing the cannon, she would continue her descent and use the aircraft's remaining kinetic energy to ensure the complete destruction of the enemy position. It was essentially a controlled crash, the kind of attack that pilots sometimes called lawn darting because it resulted in the complete loss of the aircraft and usually the pilot as well. But it was also the most effective way to guarantee that the enemy position would be neutralized and the SEAL team could be safely evacuated. "All stations, this is Warthog 6, Maria announced over the radio as she began her final dive. "I am beginning my terminal attack. Trident 4, get to the LZ and get your people out of here." At 3,000 feet above the target, Maria fired her remaining cannon ammunition in one continuous burst, emptying the entire drum in a devastating barrage that lasted only 10 seconds but effectively destroyed everything in a 200-meter radius around the enemy position. As the cannon fell silent, she continued her dive, aiming the aircraft itself at the largest concentration of enemy fighters. At 1,500 feet above ground level, something extraordinary happened. Through her radio, she heard the distinctive sound of rotor blades, and looking up, she saw two Black Hawk helicopters approaching at high speed from the east. The cavalry had finally arrived, but they were still 5 minutes away from being able to safely land and evacuate the SEAL team. Maria realized she had a choice. She could continue her terminal attack and ensure that the landing zone was completely clear of enemy resistance. Or she could attempt to pull out of her dive and try to land her damaged aircraft, possibly surviving to fly another day. But pulling out of the dive would mean that some enemy fighters might survive to engage the evacuation helicopters. The choice was actually no choice at all. Maria had sworn an oath to protect the lives of American servicemen and women, and that oath didn't include provisions for her own survival. She maintained her dive angle, aiming her aircraft directly at the center of the remaining enemy resistance. At 500 feet above ground level, Maria Santos pulled back on her control stick with every ounce of strength she possessed. Her damaged aircraft responded sluggishly, but it responded. The A-10 leveled out at 200 feet above the ground, having passed through the enemy position at high speed and low altitude, the shockwave and debris from her passage scattering the remaining fighters and clearing the landing zone completely. But the aircraft was now completely unflyable. Both engines had failed, all hydraulic pressure was lost, and the flight controls were non-responsive. Maria was essentially flying a 30,000-pound glider with the aerodynamic characteristics of a flying brick. "Mayday, Mayday," she called over the radio. "Warthog 6 is going down. Aircraft is unflyable. I am attempting emergency landing in the valley floor." The A-10's legendary toughness saved her life one final time. The aircraft belly landed on the rocky valley floor at 120 miles per hour, bouncing twice before sliding to a stop in a cloud of dust and debris. The titanium cockpit absorbed the impact, and Maria walked away from the wreckage with nothing more serious than a concussion and several broken ribs. 20 minutes later, she was aboard one of the evacuation helicopters alongside the SEAL team she had fought so hard to protect. Commander Morrison, despite his own wounds, insisted on personally thanking her for her actions. "What you did today," Morrison said as the helicopter lifted off from the valley that had nearly become their graveyard, "goes beyond courage. You saved 12 lives by putting your own on the line, and we'll never forget that." Maria Santos was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions that day, becoming the first female A-10 pilot to receive the decoration for valor in combat. But more importantly to her, all 12 members of SEAL Team 4 survived the mission and returned home safely to their families. The story of Warthog 6 spread throughout the special operations community, becoming the kind of legend that gets told and retold in bars and barracks around the world. It was a story about more than just courage under fire. It was about the unbreakable bond between ground forces and the pilots who risk everything to bring them home safely. Years later, when Maria retired from active duty as a lieutenant colonel, she was asked what she remembered most about that day in the Afghan mountains. Her answer was simple. I remember thinking that those 12 men trusted me to bring them home safely, and I wasn't about to let them down. Everything else was just details.